welcome back to Book Break. Today's video might be a long one. I have got a lot of book recommendations for you. I am going to try and recommend an LGBTQIA+ book from every genre. So let's get straight into it. Starting with literary fiction, let's kick off with a recently Booker long-listed book. This is Shaggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. So this book is set in 1980s Glasgow, and we follow a young gay boy called Shaggy who lives with his alcoholic mother Agnes, who he loves very much and has to take care of. So it's this really sad story, but with really beautifully written characters who are so real and so lovable, even if they are so damaged. And we follow Shaggy from the ages of 6 up to 17. So get ready to cry your way through that one. And then for another literary novel, My Education by Susan Choi. So this is about a 21-year-old woman called Regina who is just starting as a grad student at this really prestigious university, where she has been warned about one of the professors who has a reputation for getting a bit too close to his students, but she hasn't been warned about his beautiful, charismatic wife. So we get to see that story, and then we also check in with her 14 years later and see how she's still affected by that time in her life. And then for a genre-bending one, Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler is a literary novel with slight fantasy elements. Our main character, Paul, is a shapeshifter, and he can change his body and his gender at will. This is such a fun book. It's basically a tour of so many different 90s queer subcultures that Paul can get access through the different ways he can present himself and his body. It's very sexy. This book takes a really joyful, unabashed approach to sex, and it's a lot of fun to read. It will make you question everything we think we know about sex and gender. And then into full fantasy, there is Juniper Leaves by Jazz Joyner, with the subtitle The Otherworldly Tale of a Lonesome Magic Girl. So this is about a 15-year-old girl called Juniper who discovers she has these magical powers she didn't know anything about that she inherited from her late grandmother. So together with her cousin, they enter this whole new magical realm, which it turns out is under threat, and it's down to them to save it. And along the way, she gets her first ever crush on this other girl, so you get a really cute romance story there. And then for a much darker fantasy, there's Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyan. So this is set in a fantasy world where there are 3 castes: Paper, Steel and Moon, and Paper is at the bottom. And every year, the king selects 8 paper girls to come and be his concubines. And our main character, Lei, is one of the girls chosen, so she's absolutely terrified, but also holding on to hope that she might be able to find her mother, who was chosen years before. And this book borrows a lot of elements from Malaysian mythology. We end up with this very dark fantasy with a female-female romance at its heart. And then for a sci-fi book, I'm going to recommend A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. So this one is set in the very distant future after humanity has spread out among the stars and started a whole new empire. Our main character, Mahit, is summoned to the capital to become the new ambassador, and discovers when she gets there that her predecessor mysteriously died. So she has to solve this mystery. So the book is very much about the politics of this new world and all the parallels we can draw to our own world. And romance isn't central to the storyline, but we do get a few romance threads with a few gay and pansexual characters. And then another sci-fi book, the new book from sci-fi legend Adrian Tchaikovsky, is called Daughters of Eden. And this book starts when a woman called Lee gets a phone call from her ex-girlfriend Mal, who went missing mysteriously 4 years earlier. And as the book goes on, it just turns into this epic story with parallel worlds and timelines. And one particularly good quote I wanted to read to you from the woman who went missing. "It's a 1,000,000 to 1 long shot, and these 2 desperate lesbians can save the world. Perfect action movie material." And then let's blur those genres once again. This is where sci-fi meets murder mystery, The Psychology of Time Travel by Kate Mascarenhas. So in 1967, 4 female scientists invent a time machine, but one of the women suffers a breakdown because of the effects of time traveling too much. In 2017, we catch up with this woman as she's now a grandmother and has just received a mysterious note from the future warning her of an unknown woman's death. And then in 2018, we watch the aftermath of this murder. And it turns into this super complex murder mystery that can only be solved by piecing together all the different parts of the puzzle and different timelines. It's so much fun. And it also takes quite a dark look at corruption within this company that sprung up as the centre for time travel. And you get a few different love stories along the way with a few different queer characters, including particularly a love story between 2 women at the centre. And then for a straight up murder mystery that doesn't involve any time travel, there's Miss Timmins' School for Girls by Nayana Karimboy. This one is set in the 1970s when a young school teacher called Charu, she's not even 21 years old, arrives to teach at an all-girls boarding school in India. And there she meets another female teacher and has a sort of sexual awakening. But then one night a body is found and Charu is implicated in the murder, and 3 of the schoolgirls take it upon themselves to solve it. And then from crime we move into horror, but still set at a boarding school. This is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. So this is about these girls at a boarding school on this remote island that has become infected with the tox, which is an illness that's affecting their bodies in strange ways. It's also affecting the wildlife around them, so they are essentially trapped, relying fully on the rations that are delivered to the island that they have to fight out between them. But then one of the girls goes missing and it's up to her friends to find her, and along the way 2 of these girls discover a deeper relationship between them. This book is very weird and wonderful, lots of body horror. There's been a lot of hype about this one and very much deserved. And then if you want to go further into the body horror side of things, there is a short story collection called Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. So all of the stories in this collection are linked by the theme of female bodies, about the violence that is inflicted on women's bodies, but also about female sexuality. There's lots of sex in this book, including lots of sex between women. Right, now let's move to historical fiction, and I'm going to really quickly mention a book that isn't coming out until next year, but that is going to be City of Vengeance by D.V. Bishop. This is going to be the first in a crime series set in 1530s Florence against the backdrop of the Medici dynasty, and it's really rare that we find LGBT stories in that kind of time period. So excited for that one, but we do have a while to wait. So a book you can get your hands on right now is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. This is set in a pandemic 100 years before the one we're currently in. This is set in the Great Flu in 1918 in an Irish hospital on a maternity ward, where 3 women, a doctor, a nurse and a volunteer, drastically change each other's lives, with a romance being just one part of that. And as well as the pandemic itself being so terrifying, this is a particularly fascinating perspective focused on the aversion to contraception in Ireland at that time. So the maternity ward is this particularly tragic and difficult place to be. So it is a very sad story, but it's also a very hopeful story. Next, a very important subsection of queer literature, the coming of age story. So let's start with a classic book from the 1980s, A Boy's Own Story by Edmund White. This book traces the coming of age of our unnamed narrator, but it is largely autobiographical. This is actually the first in a trilogy of books about Edmund White's life, and it was a pretty pioneering portrayal of homosexuality for the time it was published. But then jumping forward, these kind of coming-of-age stories are still so important. So Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars by Kai Cheng Tom is a coming-of-age story about a trans girl. It's a memoir that is billed as sort of true. So in this book, our main character runs away from her parents' abusive home and finds a new found family with a group of trans women who help support her on her journey to transitioning. But then one of the women is murdered, and the book takes a really hard look at the violence perpetuated against trans women, with all of our main characters coming together to fight for justice. Then of course there's romance, a very key genre, so if you're a romance fan, why not pick up Meet Cute Club by Jack Harben. This is about a guy called Jordan who runs the Meet Cute Club, which is a romance book club that he's worried is losing steam a little bit. But then the rude new employee from his local bookshop asks to join, the same employee who is always making fun of Jordan's book taste. Together, these 2 men team up to bring the book club back from the ashes, and maybe along the way discover they don't hate each other so much after all. And then a rather different romance book is At Her Feet by Rebecca Weatherspoon. This is a BDSM romance between 2 women who meet on a dating app, and you do get to see a lot of both sides of their relationship in this book. You get to see them acting out their dominant submissive role, but you also get to see a lot more of the vanilla aspect of their relationship as well. And then for some non-fiction books. So starting with a non-fiction written by a journalist, Queer Intentions by Amelia Abraham is absolutely brilliant. In this book, Amelia Abraham takes us on a journey through LGBTQIA+ culture, interviewing loads of people from different walks of life. And the book does a really good job of combining her own personal experience with a much bigger picture, showing the range of experiences within the LGBTQIA+ community. Or for a bit of history, you could read How to Survive a Plague by David France, who is the creator of the How to Survive a Plague documentary. This is the definitive history of the battle to halt the AIDS epidemic, and it's a really powerful story of of the activists who fought to have this epidemic taken seriously, and how they became involved themselves in the research towards developing treatment. For a memoir, I recommend Me by Elton John. This is Elton John in his own words. For the first time, we get to follow his extraordinary life with so many completely outrageous stories that you never will have heard before. We get to hear everything from his rock and roll lifestyle to his setting up his AIDS foundation, his friendships with Freddie Mercury and George Michael, to his marriage to David Furnish and becoming a father. And then one more memoir, Redefining Realness by Janet Mock. So Janet Mock is a trans writer and activist, and this is her story of the path to transitioning and how it doesn't always fit all of the accepted norms. Stereotypes like she always knew she was a woman, she doesn't feel necessarily apply to her. So this book really challenges a lot of our perceptions of what it means to be trans. And then finally, my last recommendation, if you're in the mood for a classic, I recommend Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. So this book was written in 1956, and it's about an American man living in Paris and starting a relationship with an Italian man called Giovanni who he meets at a Parisian gay bar. And this is very much set in a society that is not accepting of homosexuality, and James Baldwin himself knew a lot about what it felt like to be othered by society. He actually also, like this character, left the US for Paris because of the racism that he faced in the US. And when he did then return to the States years later to take a really prominent part in the civil rights movement, he found within the movement a lot of hostility to homosexuality. But Giovanni's Room remains a staple of LGBTQIA+ literature, so definitely one for your must-read list. So are there any genres that I've missed? Do leave a comment if there were any particular genres you were hoping to get recommendations for, and I will do my best to find you the perfect book. I will also leave the link here to a video we made on LGBTQIA+ stories with happy endings if you want to read something that is guaranteed to make you smile. See you next time!